What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I am bringing you an updated hand trap tier list for the brand new format coming once Power of the Elements is released. And yeah, essentially, like, we won't have a ban list, or at least we're assuming we won't have a ban list until about a couple weeks or a month after the release of Power of the Elements. But Pote itself is going to change the format, and that's why it's sort of a next format hand trap tier list video where I will be ranking all of these hand traps for next format, so you guys can know what hand traps are good, why they're good, when you should use them, where they should be in your main and or your side, and all things hand trap related. So before we get into this video, I do want to let you guys know Discord link down below, along with all of our other social media links if you want to follow the channel more closely. Also, I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you do enjoy this Yu-Gi-Oh content, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out in what I do here on the channel. Yeah, if we could hit 10,000 subs before the end of the year, that would be awesome. So without further ado, let's get into this hand trap tier list. So we have as follows. We have meta hand traps, which are things you're probably going to want to run in your main deck. We have strong picks, which could be in your side if they're not already in your main. We have okay options, but not the best. These are like usually less good than the strong picks, but you know, depending on the situation, they might be okay. Situational, which means deck dependent, you know, like it might be only for specific decks, or only certain decks play the hand trap. And then we have cup coaster, which means you can slide these right under your glass and let the condensation just drip all over them because they are garbage. Don't actually do that. That was not a recommendation. But they are cup coaster tier. So starting off strong, we're going to start with Ash Blossom. So definitely Ash Blossom is going to be a meta hand trap, in the sense that I also have this thing called main. We're all going to be playing Ash Blossom for the most part, unless you're a very go second strategy. Ash Blossom is super good versus a couple things against Sprite. So talking about the new decks in specific, against Sprite, this hits Gigantic Sprite, it hits Starter, which if you have like another interrupt for their normal summon and you Ash Starter, sometimes that's like their whole turn. Against Tier Elements, this hits King of the Swamp, which is cool. This hits Shaylin effect in hand, which is cool. This can hit Halfinus, so it hits a lot of their actual monsters. It hits Rhino Heart, it hits their field spell, so there's a lot of things to hit. None of them are super impactful, so this is like something you're going to want to have with another hand trap against Tier Elements for sure. Against Exo Sister, this hits Martha, Pax, Vadis, like this card's insane. And yeah, this is of course good versus the decks we have now, right? Like it can hit Papega Ruler against Dragon Link, anything like that. So Ash, of course, nothing to say here. Reaper and Winter Cherries. This is situational, I think. It's a little better than Cup Coaster tier. Some decks can play this. Like if you are a deck that doesn't need your extra deck like Fluandereeze, this can be like a good card. So this is situational, like it depends on what deck you are running, so you need to be playing a deck like Flunder, and it's situational versus certain decks. So definitely in the situational tier. It's not something I would personally be playing. There's better things, but yeah, it's not completely terrible. Contact C. You know, this is interesting because looking at it, I initially wanted to put it in Cup Coaster, but I'm trying to think if you give this to, what are they? No, like this, yeah, this isn't good because, you know, it's not level 2, but they can easily make like an IP Masquerena with this card. Talking about Sprite, this card is definitely Cup Coaster tier. I wouldn't be playing it. Against Tier Elements, they can just make Guardian Chimera. Against Sprite, they can make IP, or who knows what else they can make. They can still make Elf because it just needs a level 2 monster. Yeah, this card is a Cup Coaster. DD Crow, here's a good one. DD Crow is definitely a meta tier, a meta tier hand trap that you probably want to be maining 3 copies of, and that is more for the new decks rather than like the format we were just in. So like considering the format we were just in, decks that will probably still be good going forward, this obviously is great versus Despia variants. This is decent versus like Punk stuff because you can hit the Deer Note target. It's pretty good versus Sky Striker, of course, decks like that. It's good versus Marincess. So like this card is insane versus the old decks too. It just has a couple of matchups where it's not super impactful. However, versus the new decks, this card versus Tier Element is a complete blowout. Like you just destroy one of their chances at fusion summoning. And their mills are RNG dependent, right? So oftentimes they're only going to mill one card that's going to fusion summon unless their mill is like particularly good. And you can just stop it right there. Like I've had Crow be a hand or like a turn ender in a lot of my Tier Element test games. Most of the time it's like Crow plus another hand trap, but Crow is so impactful versus that deck. And then versus Sprite, this has a couple of things it can do really good. It can hit Toad, depending on the situation. to stop its add back and make sure Elf can't bring it back. You know, because Toad tributes itself for cost, and then you can banish it on the negate, and they don't get an add back, which is nice. And then versus, you know, as well versus Sprite, you can also hit Ronin Toad, which is huge. So a couple of different options you can hit both of the new decks with. It's not good versus Flunder, it's not good versus Exo Sister. It's like okay versus Mathmech, which is also a deck that could be really strong. So Crow is definitely something in my deck I want to be playing 3 of. You could say it's like not every deck's going to play 3 of this, but it is a card I think you're going to see in more main decks for sure. Cycle Reader, it's Cup Coaster tier. Like, you could say it's situational, it's good versus some light decks, which I think Mathmechs are mostly light. I hope they're not Earth and I'm being wrong. I think some are light and some are Earth maybe. I don't know their attributes that well. It hits Eldritch, you know, it hits a couple things, but there's better. You'd rather just be playing Crow, let's be honest, because it's good versus everything. So this is Cup Coaster tier. Droll is interesting. So right now, Droll is an amazing card, I think. It's great versus Drytron, it's great versus Dragon Link, it's pretty good versus some variants of Despia. It's good versus some punk stuff, though, like the Brave Engine gets hit by this hard. So like going into the next format, I think this could be here, like strong pick side, but if we get a ban list that like wipes out the decks we have currently, this card is not good versus Sprite or Tier Elements in my opinion. Like you could say maybe it's okay versus Tier Elements, like it's not the worst thing in the world. No, it's pretty bad. Like this card's just not good against the new decks. It's okay versus Exo Sister, but I really wouldn't be dedicating like 3 slots to Droll in my side deck just for Exo Sister. So like going into next format, I think it can start here. But if we get a ban list that wipes out Dragon Link and like the Punk Engine or the Brave Engine namely, this card loses a lot of efficacy. Now, I think Drytron's going to be a good deck going into next format, so it's still good for that, but let's be honest, there's better options. Effect Veiler, definitely. Veiler is always just a solid hand trap. It doesn't hit anything in specific versus the new decks worth mentioning, like it just hits Rhino Heart. It hits Kit Kalos, which is pretty important actually. But like, I do think something to say about Effect Veiler is once we get, let's bring up Imperm, right? So I want to talk about these two together. You know, I'm not really placing them right now. I just want to talk about them. Next format, while I think Veiler is one of the hand traps you want to main if you have enough room, I think it loses a lot of its potency next format compared to Imperm. Like, Imperm's always generally the better card, right? So I'm not saying anything profound, but I think right now they're almost equal in the format. And like, Veiler has actual reasons that it could be better in the fact that it's a tuner, it's a light monster, so it's been seeing actually more play than it ever has, potentially. But next format, with Winda coming back into the format, with the fact that there are chances for Tier Element to start like making Kit Kalos not even in main phase, depending on where they get to fusion summon, I'm pretty sure like if you like activated a card effect on field, they can Halfinus and like standby phase, make Kit Kalos, and then Veiler's toast, right? So Imperm definitely stronger than Veiler, but that being said, I think both of these are amazing. Hitting Kit Kalos is crazy. Imperm at the start of your turn on like Elf is pretty good, or on Toad potentially, but you gotta make sure you're doing something with that. Like, it's a good board breaker, and hitting Kit Kalos is great. Hitting Rhino Heart's okay. Versus Sprite, hitting Gigantic Sprite's okay. Yeah, like these are gonna be good. They're not gonna be crazy. You want to have one of these with them potentially. But these are definitely something you want in the main, not the side. So these are going to be meta hand traps for sure. Gamma, I'm putting in meta hand traps. I think a lot of people are going to be on Gamma. Gamma is something that has been, you know, just so powerful for like the last 2 years, to be honest. Gamma's been insane. It lost a little bit of steam when Despia first came out, but since then, you know, it's been trending back upwards. And this is like really strong versus Sprite in particular, because you hit Gigantic Sprite with this, you get rid of the body, you get rid of the ability for them to special summon. But if you also hit like their first summon with this, it can be a turn ender too, right? Because then they need starter to keep playing. So yeah, Gamma's gonna be insane. Tier Element, I've seen a couple people play this in tier. I'm not sure it's super meta in Tier Elements, but this card is gonna be insane. It's just so strong versus everything. Of course, like, you could say it's deck dependent. Not every deck ends up playing Gamma, and of course you have Driver that comes with it. So like, some people will choose to side Gamma, but I think he's going to be a very strong hand trap next format. We're going to put Mourner. Like, I guess you could just say it's okay, but not the best option. But I wouldn't even, like, it's not very good versus either of the decks. It's like okay versus Tier. It's okay versus Sprite. Yeah, I guess it's okay. I was about to say only some decks will play it. The decks that are playing like 18 plus hand traps, they'll definitely consider running Ghost Mourner, but honestly, there are too many good hand traps right now for this one to really be anything but just okay. I really don't recommend playing this card. Ghost Ogre. Now, Ghost Ogre is super interesting. Man, Ghost Ogre is super good. So, I want to talk about Ghost Ogre. I'm going to put it in strong picks, right? However, personally, going into next format, while Dragon Link is still around and Brave is still around, I think Ghost Ogre's up here, right? Like, this card destroys Brave by itself. This card destroys Dragon Link so hard. But looking at the new decks, I would put this here. Now, this card versus Sprite is okay. You hit Gigantic Sprite, they lose the body. You can hit, like, yeah, mostly Gigantic Sprite is what you're actually going to be hitting with this. But you can also do things where you can get rid of potentially their first level 2, like, say their first level 2 is Diva, and you chain Ghost Ogre to it, and then chain Link 3, you chain Valor. You could potentially keep a level 2 off of their field. Something like that. And then versus Tier, this card is actually not bad. Like, when you're going second and their plays are going off, there's actually almost nothing you can hit with this card. It's actually terrible as, like, a hand trap going second. However, when you're starting to play on your turn and they've already established, this card's pretty good. So some of their main interrupts, right, are Dragostapelia, Time Thief Redoer, Salic, and their field spell. Ghost Ogre hits all of those extremely hard. Like, Ghost Ogre on Redoer will stop, it will first of all destroy the Redoer, and Redoer doesn't get to detach as a card effect anymore because he's in Graveyard, so they don't get their effects anything under the Redoer. Dragostapelia just gets destroyed and the Predaplant counter is not there, it doesn't do anything. You pop the field spell with this. If Salic is already face up, you can destroy it with Ghost Ogre. So Ghost Ogre is actually really good to play into a board against Tier Element, and I think a lot of people are sort of missing that, but it's like, do you want to play it versus Tier? Do you not want to play it versus Tier? It's really hard because it's not, like, guaranteed to be super strong. That's why I'll put it in side options. Now, I think it's a good hand trap going in first 2 weeks. If we don't have a ban list, this card's up here because it destroys the last meta, but as the meta progresses, if it is more like Sprite and Tier, I'd put it here. Like, I think it'd be a good, it's like a strong pick. The decks with a lot of hand traps will want to play this, but if you're only running like 9 hand traps, you probably want to run more along the line of these and Ghost Ogre here. But I think Ghost Ogre is super good, actually. Lancia, Cup Coaster. I mean, is there any deck that would want to play Lancia? Not really. I don't think Lancia is going to be very good next format. Just off the bat, nothing is really banishing. Nibiru, I'll put in strong pick or the side deck. He's not, you know, amazing versus Sprite, but a lot of Sprite players, because they think Nibiru's not good versus them, they won't respect it, and it can actually be punished by this card very hard. But it's not good versus Tier. It's actually amazing versus Exo Sister. This is like the anti-Exo Sister card. It's so annoying. But yeah, this is great versus certain decks like Marincess, and it's good versus all of the old format stuff. This is a math mech killer if they don't set up an early diameter. But yeah, Nibiru I don't think is a main deck pick at this point, but I think it's a really strong side deck pick for the decks that it hurts. Phantasme, we're going Cup Coaster. Right now, like, you could put it in situational because, like, it's good versus some decks, but the decks just aren't in the meta that it's good versus. Like, it's good versus Tri-Brigade, Sky Striker, which might be okay, but it's not going to be anything amazing. Marincess definitely won't be being played as much as it is right now, so Phantasme, honestly, we're going to put in Cup Coaster tier. Like, if you're playing something like Dragon Mage, this is still, like, a decent option because it's a level 5 or higher dragon, right? But yeah, for the most part, we're going to put this in old Cup Coaster. Retaliating Sea, also Cup Coaster. This card is dumpster right now. I mean, it's like a macro versus... Wait, hold on. Let me think about this a little bit more. Let me actually think about this card a little bit more. Retaliating Sea, say they activate Polymerization in Tier Elements. This card is probably a turn ender. It's just D-Shifter at that point, right? Versus Sprite, if they activate Starter, then you put them under a macro. I still wouldn't side it versus Sprite. It's good versus Drytron. This is interesting because I didn't really think of the implication it could have versus Tier. Now the problem with Tier is most of their fusion summons are going to happen without the use of a spell card, right? However, if the format shifts, like there's gonna be a caveat on Retaliating Seed. So essentially, if the format shifts and the fusion deployment, polymerization, like King of the Swamp variant of Tier elements is like really good and probably the best version, I would say this card's pretty strong. If we find out that, like, you know, our opponent's activating starter in the Sprite deck is like good for us to hit here, this is still pretty strong. It's good versus Drytron, it's okay versus Dragon Link because you can hit them on Quick Launch, E-Tele, or Boot Sector Launch, and then this card's insane. Hold up, have we been sleeping on this card? On paper right now, maybe I'm just having a lapse, but like E-Tele's been in the format, Quick Launch is super good. Like, can this be activated on right? Hold up, can you activate Retaliating Sea on right? I guess on right it doesn't matter because it can just be Draco back bounce, but like, honestly, this might be okay. That's where I'm putting it. D-Shifter is situational. It is deck dependent. Not every deck can play this. If we're talking about how good D-Shifter is, of course D-Shifter's here. If your deck can play it, D-Shifter's right here. It's just the best hand trap. It's a turn end against everything not named Exo Sister or Fluandereeze. But versus Math Mech, versus Sprite, versus Tier, this card is a turn ender versus Drytron, turn ender. However, sort of like Fluandereeze, there are so few decks that can actually play D-Shifter. It's Exo Sister, Flunder, Madolche. Sprite will play it like the OCG, probably once Tier is by far more powerful than they are with the Ishizu stuff. Just because, like, against Tier Element, they can still set up something under it while Tier does nothing. But yeah, we're going to put D-Shifter in the best of situational because only certain decks can play it. But obviously D-Shifter is the most powerful hand trap in the game. Token Collector, it's deck dependent. I mean, like, you could say it's a side deck pick, but there's not much tokens next format, so I would only play Token Collector if you're a Shooting Riser deck that could, like, play it in the side as a one-of, right? So if you're a deck with Shooting Riser and that doesn't get hit on the ban list, you know, it'll be played in those. And it's situational in the sense that you only side it for certain decks, like Sword Soul or, you know, things like that. Bell. Bell is an interesting topic here because no one is talking about Bell. Like, from what I've seen, no one's talking about. Everyone is talking about Crow. Bell, however, is sneaky good because I think this is not only just like Crow in a lot of situations, right? Like, a Tier Element, if it's activating as Chain Link 1 to Fusion Summon, you can Bell it. You know, you can Bell Elf Effect, you can Bell Ronin Totem Effect. And, you know, you could say Crow is just better in those situations, and it's true. However, if your deck is hit by Crow and Called by the Grave, Bell is also a counter to a card like DD Crow. This card is always interesting because I think it's particularly good against, like, the more defensive options, right? Like, you can hit things like Ice Dragon's Prison with this. I'm not saying that's a popular card. What I'm saying is it can be used defensively to protect yourself from certain things like that, right? Also, this thing can hit the Deer Note effect, which is pretty good. It can hit Water Enchantress even from hand, right? Even like they don't have it in graveyard, you can still Bell Water Enchantress, which is always good. So I'm going to put this in deck dependent, or do I want to put it in side pick? Like, Bell definitely actually has more use than people are giving her credit for. She's fallen off so hard for Crow, but I actually think because of Crow, like, I'm going to put it in deck dependent because if I'm playing Marincess, right, and I'm afraid of a card like DD Crow or something like that, Bell suddenly becomes a really good protection card, and in a lot of situations, it can still do what Crow does. So I think it's like weird to rank Bell because I think it's deck dependent, but I mean, I'm gonna put it in deck dependent because I think your deck needs to be weak to a card like Crow and Banish effects for you to really choose. Like, this is also, you know what, something else to mention about Bell. It's really good versus Exo Sister's Latanya, because, you know, it could banish a card from graveyard, so you can just Bell that effect, which is really nice. It can stop Crow that would proc their Malfa, things like that. Also, it's pretty good versus Math Mechs, because this card stops Super Factorial, which is like their best card. So against Math Mech, wow, like this card could be pretty good. Like, I think it's deck dependent, but I also think it's not a bad card in general. Like, it's pretty pretty good. I think Bell needs more testing. Dogwood, it's situational. It's like a side deck pick. I think you only play this in certain decks, like really slow decks, like Dragon Maid or Sky Striker or Altergeist, where you might need a time win condition and your deck doesn't have one. I mean, Sky Striker does, but, you know, I digress. Or maybe a deck that is, like, very water specific. Like, I know Mermail used to play this card because they're locked into water and things like that. Lastly, Skullmeister, he is a cup coaster. He's not good. Like, you could say, you know, he does what Crow and Bell does, but I think Bell is better than Meister right now for sure. And, like, it's really only for that situation. It can't protect you like Bell. Honestly, like, this can hit tier elements, it can hit Ronin Totem, but it does it infinitely less effective than cards like Crow or Bell. So, you could honestly put it in okay, but not the best option. Maybe it belongs here. Maybe he's not a cup coaster. Maybe if you just don't have access to Bell or Crow and you have these in your bulk and want to use them, it's okay. Wow, that was longer than I expected it to be. I hope you guys enjoyed. Leave your thoughts down below on this tier list, how you're ranking it. Again, you know, I'm basing this off the format testing we have now and the OCG, what we think's going to happen. Of course, a ban list is probably going to come and we might have to update this past the ban list. However, that being said, I think this list is looking pretty accurate. There's nothing I would hard disagree with. So, yep, that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.